democracy, human beings need to be able to interact with each other with a bit of a shared understanding.
If we take away all the information and just leave that one particular information that we think is less harmful or is needed, then the youths will not be critical thinkers.
And I think by this, we're also going to perpetuate the ability to say, hold on, that my voice counts, therefore our voice counts.
So we're going to just receive the same information from one side, even though we have a multicultural society and we're a democracy, we should only hear from one side.
When a lie is repeated several times, then that lie becomes your truth.
Well, and I think you're talking about here even just indoctrination.
One is lack of a variety of information. That's you're imprisoning your brain, like you talked about, mind control. You become just robotic.
You're losing a whole lot more. It is very significant cost to society to not have conversations from both sides. We just finished having a conversation again around some things that, besides not having a platform, what other variables are there that contribute to people not wanting to have a conversation. We talked about just the fear of getting attacked. If big influential people can get really attacked on air, what would happen to me? We've talked about the fear of losing relationships. We talked about peer pressure, but just the need to belong. And if you've got meaningful relationships, somebody might just cast you out because you have a different viewpoint. We've talked about even the fear of losing your jobs. There's just so much, or being just even attacked, like on social media, where they don't see there's a human being behind that screen, and people just let it all rip. But also we talked about just the difference in generations, and the mindset is, some generations where it's preserve myself at all costs, preserve society at all costs. We can't say anything bad. We can't say something that would hurt anybody. Therefore, it's way more important to protect and preserve than it is to actually receive information. We haven't seen the value of that. And that is also keeping people, from even the mindset of being willing to engage in discussions and critical thinking, and to be mature enough to say, there's something of value that I might be missing. But just as we're going through this a little bit more too, let's talk about, before we get into, some of the benefits of actually doing this, let's talk about the impacts that these barriers are having on society. What are some of the things that you're noticing? What are some of the impacts that we actually see? Why is this problematic?
For myself personally, I would say that these issues that we're facing today, the issues that are going on right now, and why people are and the being implanted in people is pushing us away from democracy. Because when you're an outsider like myself, I came from Africa, you have high expectations when you hear about countries like Canada, Western countries in general, because they're the ones that are more democratic. But then when you come here in person, and then you realize that some people are being banned from social media, and also some people are just shut down because they have the less common views, then you realize that there is really no democracy here.
And there's behaviors in place or penalties in place just to have normal conversation about issues that matter to them. And perhaps if there's censorship because they say something controversial,
right,
it sends a message to you that this is not the democratic Canada that I thought there was. So it's actually, the impact on our society is a threat to democracy itself.
Coming from Africa, we lived in places where we never had gender education, meaning that yes, there are academics arguments that homosexuality was also an part of African culture, but I grew up in Africa. It wasn't common. It was not a common practice. So coming here, it was really something new. But when we first came, my brothers are very active in the community. One of them registered with a certain organization. They had to volunteer in Toronto. That was just the first year when we landed in Canada. Went to Toronto. He traveled to Toronto, and among the people in the group, there was someone that was a trans. Have in mind that we were new in Canada, really new, never had gender education. So for him, when he saw the person looked like a she. And so he referred to the person just like everybody else, like she, and that person was very angry at my brother. It traumatized him. Understand it, because pronouns are very important to those people, but you also have to understand, where is this person coming from? Does this person want to offend me on purpose? Why is this person referring to me as a she and I'm a he? You know, all those things you have to understand. You need to understand those things before you just come to a conclusion that this person wants to attack me. There is a democracy. We need to sit down and understand. They, for me, they had to sit down and ask my brother questions. Why did you refer to this person as a she and it's a he? But there was no room for that, and he didn't want to hear anything from my brother. It just concluded that my brother wanted to offend him. And it was very traumatizing for my brother, because he was seeing a woman, and he's from Africa. He didn't even spend a year here, not even a year,
Right.
and he was volunteering. So those kind of things for me just made me realize, we're not really a democratic nation.
What you're saying is, in a democracy, human beings need to be able to interact with each other with a bit of a shared understanding, right?
Right, right.
So because you can't have a relationship with any other human being if you don't have a shared understanding. So you just
Correct.
gave an example where your brother comes in, he doesn't
Mhm.
have a shared understanding
At
about
all,
a
zero,
trans
zero,
person, and he doesn't know the protocol, and he doesn't even
not at all.
understand it. So he's not on the
Mhm.
same page even.
No.
And there was an expectation in the trans in terms of how he should be treated, and it was
Mhm.
expected,
Mhm.
and your brother was penalized harshly, you said, to the point of being
Absolutely.
traumatized. Here he is, a
Absolutely.
volunteer coming from another country, but
Mhm.
he just didn't know better. He did not have that shared understanding.
Mhm.
So when he went to try to have a shared understanding, please clarify, please help me to understand,
Exactly.
right? No room for discussion. You should know
Mhm.
better. If they would have had the conversation, perhaps the trans person would have shared how he's been really hurt and
Exactly.
how he's been very attacked before. So he's operating on assumptions. He
Mhm.
believes that your brother was actually trying to be, rude. And so
Mhm.
he's right away already defensive.
Right.
I was traveling into Asia, into remote villages in Asia. And for them, showing your feet apparently is a very rude thing to do. Like,
Mhm.
you don't stick your feet up. It's very offensive and very disrespectful. Like, you take your shoes off before you go in anywhere. Your feet are not, they're considered like very offensive. And I was traveling, I think flying 14 some hours overseas, and my
Mhm.
legs were swollen. And I didn't know this rule about feet. So I get to this little airport in this little remote place, and I right away put my feet up on my suitcases, and my bare feet are sticking out because I'm trying to get my feet to not swell.
Yeah.
Well, I found out I offended so many people because I didn't know better. And of course, as
Right.
soon as I understood and had a shared understanding, don't
Mhm.
stick your feet up in people's face. Of course, I'm not trying to be offensive. I just didn't know better. The impact on that
Right.
we're talking about is that you can't have a shared understanding with another human being that's different than you. You can't have
Absolutely.
another shared understanding with another culture that's different than you. You can't have a shared understanding with another race that's different than you. You can't have a shared
Absolutely.
understanding with another generation that's different than you. This is craziness,
Mhm.
especially if we say we're a democratic
Right.
nation, multicultural nation that is embracing differences. Well, that's ridiculous if you can't talk about your differences and what you agree with regarding societal issues.
Because our country is a melting pot of multicultural people. Like, I think we're going to even actually go even further that way.
When we talk about race, it's very unfortunate, at least in my opinion, that there had to be the death of George Floyd for people to start sitting down to talk. And even those discussions, they also seem to be one-sided. I was also volunteering for a certain lady. She was from Africa, but not from Congo. Now, the place that she rented, there were also other people from other nations that were also selling stuff. The lady in charge of the region was a white lady. Unfortunately, I think she got confused because there were over 30 people with different spots, and she gave her the wrong spot. She quickly told the lady, "Is it because I'm black? That's why you give me the wrong spot?" And for me, I just felt it didn't have anything to do with race. There were over 30 people, over 30 orders. It's normal for someone to be confused. I see that, like you said, hurt, someone who's been repeatedly hurt, we quickly come to conclusion without this kind of discussions that the other person just wants to offend them or just wants to hurt them again.
We have the tendency, I'm sure, as we all do from any culture, to judge a book by its cover, right? We automatically assume something, and that assumption, as we all know, can be very dangerous. And then you also included in there that that person is also coming with hurts, and they've come from a different country, and we don't know what they came from, right?
But the impact that we're having on society is that it's a risk against democracy. It's a risk that we're not going to have shared understanding between various differences in terms of whether it be culture or race or generational gaps, right? We're not going to have a shared understanding because we don't have opportunity to clarify. There's going to be instead a lot of misunderstanding. And with misunderstanding, there's a lot of judgment. There's a lot of hatred. There's a lot of, again, fighting against people rather than fighting for perhaps equality or fighting for respect. There seems to be bias. There's not really a good conversation from both sides. What do you think the impact on society would be if you're only getting information from one side? How do you think that's going to impact our society?
Well, repeated information from one side, first of all, it reduces critical thinking among the youth, in particular, because the youth are considered the future leaders. If we take away all the information and just leave that one particular information that we think is less harmful or is needed, then the youths will not be critical thinkers, and they'll be always swallowing one type of information, which will lead them to believe that it's the truth. Like I read somewhere that when a lie is repeated several times, then that lie becomes your truth.
Even how the brain works, there's pathways formed in your brain when you do something repeatedly over time. You actually, your neurons begin to connect and they only go down that pathway and it becomes the way you think. So your brain is not challenged to think maybe perhaps there's other information. So you're only thinking one way.
We used to have a saying back in the day, I don't know if it's still a thing now, if everybody told you to jump off the bridge, would you? There needs to be the one that says, hold on here, there's actually something more that I can learn. If we stand up and we say, hold on here, this is something that's not exactly what I'm thinking or want, and I need to actually stand up and speak a different narrative. Because one voice can actually change a nation, can it not?
And like on a huge scale, if you actually listen to that, people that Germany went through when there was the persecution of the Jewish people.
Yeah.
If you actually have a conversation with the German people that live there, they will tell you that there was only one narrative. There was a lot of control over the information they received. They received certain information about the Jews. They were led to believe that the Jews were harmful to their society and that they should get rid of them. Yeah. And that was consistently put down. And then what they did was they gathered the younger generation. You mentioned that too, Albert, the younger generation, and they became the ones that were so programmed to believe, they actually believed that they were looking out for their country by persecuting the Jewish people. And the whole society believed that because they only received one narrative. That's all they were allowed to hear. So again and again and again, the truth for them was that the Jewish people were enemies to the country. They were harmful to the people. They would cause all kinds of harm. Therefore, we should get rid of them. And that's really serious. Like there's nobody that would actually agree today that was okay, what happened. But yet, if we believe it's okay in society to only have one viewpoint and only one narrative out there, because it's too dangerous for us to hear another narrative. So we're going to just receive the same information from one side, even though we have a multicultural society and we're a democracy. We should only hear from one side because otherwise it's too dangerous, right? Well, then whatever that side believes about perhaps another race, whatever that side believes about another generation, whatever that side believes, about another gender, without having a shared understanding, because you're not allowed to have the conversation because there's too much at stake. So you only receive one narrative, and that's where your judgments form.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're talking about here even just indoctrination, right? Like just a constant, and Alberta touched on this, you know, if you continue to hear the lie over and over and over, you think that it's the truth. And so, you know, I think that's why it's so incredibly important right now to be going, we have to actually hear both sides, you know, not just one side is the narrative, but what is actually the both sides. And I think by this, we're also going to perpetuate the ability to say, hold on, you know, that my voice counts, therefore our voice counts.
Yeah.
You know?
And I want to just touch on this a bit too, because you've mentioned this a few times, Serena, about having a voice, but we have to understand that not only, it's not just that your voice matters, it's actually your responsibility to contribute to society, right? Because the reality is your voice matters because that's part of your responsibility. I have something to bring to the table. It's necessary that my voice be heard because I'm representing a certain people group. I might be representing a certain generation. I might be representing women, right? I might be representing, you know, where I come from. And so there's something I've got to bring to the table, but you're representing something else yet. And if we don't all represent what's important from our viewpoints and listen to one another, then definitely it's that's where you get discrimination. If we're talking about what we gain from it, which I'm going to get into in a minute, versus what we lose, we are losing a whole lot more. It is very significant cost to society to not have conversations from both sides. The cost is great. It is actually very serious. It's dangerous. We lose critical thinking. We don't have shared understanding. We can't represent the interests of the people. We don't have enough solutions. We become brainwashed, very disempowered as a people in a society, right?
Yeah. And if we look even at history, and we look at powerful nations like China or even Russia, we will see that there was a big migration from those countries to more democratic countries because of the lack of democracy. Because democracy, you know, the inclusion of other people is something that humanity is searching for. That's why you see a lot of people doing everything they can to move to Western countries, because there's that belief that Western countries are more democratic. But now, if we just have one single information that's continuously flowing, then there'll be a repeated of communism that happened previously in China, in all those places, and um, I don't know, but migration might even stop because there will be no innovations. Because when there are various ideas, this exchange of information, this innovation and creativity is encouraged in various sectors. But when there's just one source of information, it discourages a lot of people. That's why you see in Africa, we talk about brain drain. There are more doctors, African doctors in Western countries than in Africa. That doesn't mean that Africans are not smart. We're capable, but most of our educated Africans are working in Western countries. For example, there are more Africans with PhDs in Western countries than in Africa. That's why we're less developed, and that's because of a single source of information. Dictatorship and all those things that, you know, you don't feel free. There are various ways of being in prison. One is lack of a variety of information. That's, you're imprisoning your brain, like you talked about, mind control. You know, you become just robotic. You can't think properly outside the box.
You know, that's really something too. I mean, that's a topic in itself, you know, but it is true that many people coming from a developing nation are coming to a democratic country because of the freedom it gives. And so that is really true, that a lot of developing nations are lacking the resources they need because they're fleeing. Those that are educated are fleeing. So they're coming because they think it should be a country that's going to give me freedom to choose and to represent my interests and et cetera, to have my voice being heard, as Serena's mentioned, you know, having voices being heard. But, you know, if you can't hear both sides, if all of a sudden that voice gets shut down, then you will lose those contributors that, they're going to stop coming, or maybe I don't know where everybody's going to be going. But, I want to just, I want to throw this around a little bit too, because there's another side to this, because people, of course, there is, people coming from other countries that have been in more dictator type of governments, coming from countries where there has not been the freedom. So there, you're coming into a country where you believe there should be freedom. And all of, it's like the writings on the wall when you start to see one-sided, like where everything's being controlled and people are being intimidated, and perhaps even, social media platforms are censoring information in the name of protecting people from harmful stuff, but it's also costing us, right? There's a huge price we're paying. And so other nations might think, oh my gosh, this looks very much like a dictatorship. This looks very much like a country that's losing its freedom. But I want to say the other part too, is there's people that have actually studied nations where they have looked at the positive aspects of socialism, of some parts of socialism. There's pieces of it that they've seen have been positive, and again, we're going to have that kind of conversation on our show coming up too. We're going to talk about capitalism versus socialism, because that's very controversial, and I'm not sure if we can swing that far. It might have to be more, free enterprise versus socialism, etc. But on the one side is that for those that are afraid of dictatorships or closed countries or not free countries, they're going to plug their ears right away and not even hear if there's anything beneficial about aspects of socialism, right? Like, because they might just say, no way, I don't even want to hear about it, because I saw the extreme there where my country was so oppressed. I'm not going to even listen to you about that. That's just really bad. So they're going to fight against that. And then there's some that are really going to push for it to the extreme. But there's others that just want to say, we probably should care for the poor and the disenfranchised and the people in society while we have enterprise. And that's what a democracy should do. But nobody's listening to each other. They're not listening how to figure it out. It's like one way versus the other way, my way or your way, but we're not going to hear each other. So, we've talked about that, is that the dangers of not having a conversation about these differences. You won't discover information that can give us good solutions and ideas. And so you want to hear from those that came from countries where it was dictatorship. You want to hear the dangers if we go too far. But you also want to hear those that are really I know a lot of really compassionate people that hear the brokenness of people that are struggling, and they have no opportunities. And they're fighting they're fighting systems, they're fighting everything, because they're trying to represent the needs of these people. But if nobody hears, we're very lopsided again. So there's a danger in society that we're actually not representing the interests of a democratic nation. When we're talking to our audience out there, and you might be looking and say, whoa, maybe I have been a little bit narrow-minded, in my thinking, and that's not, don't feel offended by that or feel ashamed, but you might want to change your mind on that and say, maybe there is something, there's a piece here, because I've often said to people, we're often told, with diversity is good, but most people just barely tolerate differences. Diversity means differences. We don't really embrace it because we don't understand the value of the differences. We don't really see that it brings something to us. So we just kind of tolerate it. And for sure, that involves critical thinking and realizing that differences are not your enemy. Differences are not your enemy. Thinking only one way is your enemy. Restricting information is your enemy. Learning only how to have conversations with someone just like you is your enemy.
That's so good, Michelle. I love what you're saying, because it's more based on fear. What am I going to lose? Instead of actually going, hold on, maybe I need to actually change the way my brain is thinking and actually put in another form of thinking, going, what if I learn? What am I going to gain? Rather than what I'm going to lose, what am I going to gain from this?
At the end of the day, there are many interests in a society, and there's many ideas that come from those various backgrounds and races and generations and ideologies, that you might not, again, even agree with everything, but I think you need to hear